Before going to school, Akari Watanabe encounters her childhood friend Sakurasaki Shiori. By chance, the latter manages to touch her. Yes, but nothing bad, as you'll see. Eventually, we meet the main character, Jiro. It's explained that the school offers a course called Marriage Practices, which is for practicing marriage because this geek didn't get along well with girls. And they assign you to live with a student from your class. Everyone was eager to know who the next one was, but the main character didn't think it was worth it. They encounter Akari shortly after, but she wasn't very friendly with them. She was the popular one, and she knew it. She was extremely unpleasant to the protagonist due to her rudeness and other undesirable traits. Minami Tenji appears at that exact moment. However, as you can see, the popular obviously liked that guy because she fell in love with him. The protagonist converses with Shiori, his childhood love and friend, in the living room. He was expecting that, actually, he would have to coexist with her. The instructor began outlining how the pairings were going to be done. Although they would share a roof, they wouldn't share a bed. You could enter here with fingerprint by the vegetation, so they wouldn't have it. And since the protagonist was paired with Akari, things didn't go as planned for him. And look how funny they are talking. It's clear they lost points as soon as they started arguing because everything was monitored. The girl explains the rules and demonstrates how they can change partners once they reach rank A. She and the protagonist formed an alliance to get along and earn points to be able to change partners because in these it was said that the top 10 places had the right to change partners, but both had to agree. She starts offering advice to the main character in this way. After seeing her friend with the popular guy in class, the protagonist's heart shattered into 1,000 pieces, leaving him a bit discouraged. Akari was forced to make him feel better by acting like a nice guy. She said it again, saying they had to act like a married couple if they wanted to advance to rank A. Her friend appears at that precise moment so they can travel to a specific place. Then, to advance, she asks him to give her a farewell kiss. Even though the protagonist initially didn't want to, he eventually did it due to her persistent demands. She blushed completely upon realizing he meant one of her cheeks, not her lips, and he didn't realize. When the time came to leave, the protagonist encounters Akari. She mentions that she's going to karaoke with the handsome guy from their class. Then, the protagonist conveys the teacher's message to Akari, but she doesn't want to go. She tells the protagonist to handle it alone, and after he leaves, the teacher advises her to take the married program seriously since they're still in rank E and little has changed after a week. A few hours later, it starts raining, and the protagonist doesn't have an umbrella, so he waits for the rain to stop. While chatting with Shiori, she asks him to call her by her name to indicate their closeness, similar to how she does with her friend who also forgot her umbrella. Shiori gives the protagonist a hug in that moment because she thought she saw an insect. The protagonist remembers the morning when she also hugged the attractive guy because she thought there was an insect. The rain didn't stop that night. On the contrary, it became heavier. Consequently, Watanabe reasoned that it would be wise to watch horror movies and act like a normal married couple once again, and of course, to rank within the top 10. However, there's a power outage due to the rain, and Watanabe is terrified by the lightning. She then hugs our protagonist. She turns on the phone flashlight and looks at Watanabe, who is clearly upset, her face tearful. They then change into their night clothes. The electronically operated doors prevent them from entering their rooms. As a result, they spend time in the living room. She's extremely bored. She then asks our main character to tell her a story or something, and our main character immediately starts telling a scary story. Watanabe experiences frequent panic attacks. But then, she remembered that one of her friends had given her a scented candle. Come on, it smells wonderful. And in the end, it's the perfect setup for our protagonist to hug her and tell her she's incredibly cute. However, she fell asleep. Our main character eventually falls asleep, but she was actually pretending to sleep when, of course, she heard the tenderness. Our protagonist's rating has increased significantly the next day. The heartthrobs and Shiori's scores, however, have dropped significantly. Shortly after, Watanabe goes out with some friends when our protagonist catches a cold. The protagonist is left totally abandoned. But finally, there's a knock on the door. It turns out to be Shiori. In light of Watanabe's request, she assures our protagonist that she'll take care of him today. Then, a scene from the past is shown, depicting our protagonist and Shiori just before he was about to tell her everything he was feeling. But at that precise moment, she assures him that she'll always be his friend, and our protagonist agrees. When we return to the present, our main character enjoys Shiori's delicious dinner and talks about what's going on with their marital customs. She says she's doing her best, but she always gets extremely anxious and ends up separating from the popular guy. She then adds that she wishes she had touched him to close the gap. Our protagonist urges her not to give up, assuring her that she'll definitely be able to solve the problem. Anyway, when night falls, our protagonist falls asleep, and Shiori is anxious to kiss him. She then regrets it and remembers the moment when our protagonist was about to confess his love. She also believes that if she proposes marriage to him again, our protagonist might pay attention this time. Watanabe then appears after Shiori has left. To express her gratitude, our protagonist gets out of bed. He also promises to work hard to be a good husband so that she can then elope with her lover. However, Watanabe is upset for some reason. The next day, Watanabe asks our main character what men want girls to do for them. An excellent lunch prepared with love and care, says our protagonist. Watanabe requests all of this, by the way, to make lunch for the popular guy. Everything, according to our protagonist, was delicious. That being said, he would have preferred the omelette to be sweeter. And Watanabe, somewhat rudely, informs him that she's not seeking his opinion and believes that the popular guy is a very mature individual, so he won't enjoy making something overly sweet for him. The next day, Watanabe prepares lunch for the popular guy. When our protagonist tries the omelette again, he discovers to his surprise that it's not sweet at all. Watanabe gets ready to leave. However, Shiori appears just as she's about to do so. It happens that she baked an apple pie for our protagonist. But she went overboard. Then she says that men have a sweet tooth and sweets attract them. Watanabe is devastated when Shiori leaves. Our protagonist tells her that she's a very pretty girl and would make anyone fall in love with her in an effort to cheer her up. However, he confuses her by stating that any man would want to be in a relationship with her. Our main character makes an effort to dodge the issue. Watanabe asks if he would also be interested in engaging in similar behavior with her. And the girl literally jumps on him before telling him that she'll make his wish come true if he wants to. However, the protagonist grabs her hand and informs her that he already has the popular guy and that only those he loves can participate in such activities. Then Watanabe informs him that he already has Shiori and orders him to end their marriage. Their points decrease drastically, and the two began to drift apart. Shiori recognizes this and asks our protagonist about the situation. He admits that they essentially fought. Shiori then encourages him to go apologize to Watanabe. So, the main character enters the apartment and knocks on Watanabe's door. She opens the door for him. Watanabe advises our protagonist to move forward with what happened earlier, but also lets him know that she thought it was wrong for them to take advantage of the circumstance and carry out their plan. Furthermore, he believed he needed to show her more affection, and our protagonist finally asks her for another chance to remarry. Watanabe, however, burst out laughing at that exact moment. And despite her claims that she didn't want to continue the marriage, the school essentially forces them to stay married. Therefore, simply separating isn't possible. As a result, our protagonist looked foolish. However, Watanabe immediately confesses her admiration for our protagonist. Our protagonist moves closer to kiss her. However, she explains that it's a joke. The fact is, they have a clean slate to work with. After a while, Watanabe goes out onto the balcony and is mortified by what she just said. The next day, after they leave the physical education class, our protagonist asks Shiori if she hasn't considered staying with the popular guy forever. Watanabe is finishing up organizing her physical education materials when the popular guy appears out of nowhere. Watanabe bumps into the shelf, and a box is about to fall and hit him on the head. However, he is shielded by the popular guy. Watanabe's heart races. But before the popular guy can leave, Watanabe stops him and asks if he intends to stay with Shiori permanently. He responds that maybe, it all depends on whether Shiori agrees. Watanabe starts to cry. Although the handsome guy is aware of this, she tells him a lie, saying that trash accidentally got in her eye. Just as the popular guy is about to look her in the eyes, the friend of the protagonist notices them and quickly warns him. At that moment, Watanabe leaves with the handsome man and returns to the apartment with Shiori. The friend of the protagonist also leaves and realizes that something strange happened involving the protagonist and Watanabe. They then enter the classroom, where the friend of the protagonist has more privacy to describe in detail what he saw. He claimed that the hunk kissed Watanabe. However, our protagonist claims not to be concerned. Shiori is reclining on the sofa when he re-enters the apartment. When our protagonist asks if something is wrong or if she has a fever, she simply ignores him. As a result, our protagonist becomes angry and apologizes for not being the popular guy. Upon hearing him say that, Watanabe asks our protagonist about the kiss he shared with the handsome guy and demands to know why. It's clear our protagonist is a bit angry. Watanabe, on the other hand, bursts into laughter and explains that that actually never happened and that the hunk didn't even look at her. She suddenly starts crying. When Watanabe tells her that she's crying not to be seen, our protagonist hugs her while keeping his eyes closed to let out her emotions. After that, Watanabe becomes significantly more affectionate than usual and informs him that, contrary to what he might have thought, he had given her her first kiss before she kissed the popular guy. And so, our protagonist literally faints. The next day, Shiori switched places with a girl who was supposed to clean the classroom, and when our protagonist went to look for her, he found out that she had been there the whole time. It turns out the girl had been urging Shiori to take her first step non-stop. Initially, Watanabe looks for the protagonist at that moment, but after realizing he's alone with Shiori, she chooses to leave them alone. Shiori instructs the main character to lean in after that. She was undoubtedly expecting a kiss from them. But she admits she had chalk on her face. Although it wasn't true, she simply lacked the courage to kiss him. When the protagonist and Watanabe look at the stars later, she tells him to call her by her first name right away. Although our protagonist struggles, he eventually succeeds. Then, Watanabe tells him to say it again, saying it's unfair that she always calls him by his first name while he always refers to her by her last name and that this makes it seem like only she is in love with him. He tries to evade the issue by explaining it's not what he thinks and that he was referring to the practices. After hearing what he just said, Watanabe walks away perplexed. It then moves on to performance tests, which are essentially evaluations whose results will be added up for the couple and could either help them or harm them. Furthermore, because Watanabe has good grades while our protagonist is not exactly a model student, she's worried about making a mistake. Watanabe has been spending a lot of time with her friends lately, and it's clear she's not studying anything, so our protagonist is concerned. So, instead of going on dates, our protagonist advises Watanabe to focus on her studies, and warns her that if she doesn't, the popular guy will probably be even more out of her reach. The two decide to finish their studies at home. The protagonist completes all his homework despite Watanabe's attempts to tempt her into stopping studying. After being congratulated by the main character for doing everything right, she starts becoming a little more affectionate. Our protagonist, however, does nothing but try to avoid her until he briefly loses focus. The protagonist nose, however, starts bleeding just before they are about to kiss. The two get ready for a new school day the next day. Watanabe continues to refer to the main character by his last name. The odd thing is that she seems to be in a very good mood. After reflecting all day on what's happening with Watanabe, our protagonist comes to the conclusion that maybe it's because he keeps calling her by her last name. Due to her 8th place in the exam, Watanabe comes home in high spirits. When the main character calls Watanabe by her first name after taking a bath, it immediately hits the mark. Naturally, they earn more points this way. This is bad news for Shiori, and a friend advises her not to waste time. At that moment, a ball hits Shiori and ends up in the infirmary, where Shiori's friend tells the protagonist to take care of her. Shiori quickly fixes herself up, and the two start talking. She tells our protagonist that she's a little worried because she feels like she's still very childish. The main character asks her if she hasn't kissed the popular guy. Shiori tells him no and takes the opportunity to ask if he could teach her how to kiss. The protagonist says yes, but Shiori, at the last moment, changes her mind. A girl enters the hospital abruptly and realizes she has disrupted a significant event. Indeed, they did kiss, but it was an accident, and then the girl walks away. The protagonist leaves, and Watanabe's friend, the girl from before, tells him there were two people acting strangely on the hospital bed. Informing Watanabe that he was with Shiori at the hospital at that time, our protagonist sends her a message. Late at night, Watanabe finds the main character asleep. Therefore, she lies down beside him. Our protagonist is surprised to find Watanabe next to him when he wakes up the next morning not wearing much clothing. Furthermore, Watanabe tricks her by saying he was the one to blame. The next day, Shiori carries some trash bags. Then she encounters Watanabe's friends. They immediately realize she has feelings for Shiori when one of them asks for help from our protagonist and his friend. They then inform Watanabe of what they've noticed and ask her if she feels anything for him or not. Watanabe is unsure, to put it simply. When the usual festival finally begins, Watanabe dresses in her best yukata so that the popular guy can take a look at her. While Watanabe makes derogatory remarks towards our protagonist, like saying she'll have to watch the fireworks alone when she'll enjoy them with the popular guy, our protagonist helps with her yukata. Watanabe then meets her friends at the festival, who have devised a plan to ensure she has the perfect night with the popular guy. However, a friend of the popular guy who was supposed to accompany him to the festival claimed he eventually refused due to his busy schedule. Then, when Watanabe starts walking alone through the festival, she unexpectedly sees the handsome guy with Shiori. Upon returning from the grocery store, Watanabe's friends notice she looks a bit downcast. She's advised to go back home since she couldn't go out with the heartthrob. By the way, the popular guy had to go to work but not before spending some time with Shiori. After that, our main character sits on the balcony feeling a little down. Watanabe calls him at that moment and is sobbing, and he decides to go look for her but realizes they're right next to the door. He wipes away a tear and says, "Welcome home," even though she was waiting outside his apartment. The two start watching the fireworks from the balcony. Watanabe asks him to hold her hand and lets him tie her own style of knot on the ribbon. When she almost drops her phone while trying to watch a video on how to tie a ribbon, the protagonist accidentally hugs her. "Say my name," Watanabe requests. Then they watch the fireworks while debating whether this will be their first and last experience with them. The next day, our protagonist and Watanabe notice that they've moved up to the 13th place on the marriage ranking when they check the statistics. They will have to remain partners for a while longer because it's still insufficient for them to change partners. Our protagonist is in the bathroom contemplating everything that happened after the previous night. Watanabe, terrified of spiders, enters the house at that very moment. So, even when he's using the bathroom, our protagonist is forced to stay with her the whole time. They sit together on the couch later. Watanabe starts talking about their lives if they hadn't met during these marriage practices while she's fixing her nails. Watanabe advises him not to say that and suggests that even though they wouldn't fit perfectly, they wouldn't be as far apart as our protagonist claims. She tells him that otherwise, they would just be strangers. Watanabe then goes crazy again when the spider reappears. Later in the apartment, Shiori tells the popular guy about a friend of hers who has feelings for a guy but isn't sure how to confess when they're together. Drawing from her own experience, she advises him to try if there's a chance and not let it pass by. Shiori's friend then recommends some clothes for her when they're talking. However, Shiori insists that wearing different clothes would make her look better. While telling her friend not to think about her, she caresses Shiori's hair. The person I mentioned earlier who was supposed to take the popular guy to the festival arrives at that very moment. She knows she likes Shiori because she's the husband of the redhead. She has convinced the redhead to spend the night at Shiori's place. Shiori and her friend are at a cafe later in the evening. They can bathe together, sleep together, and do other activities, Shiori starts saying. The redhead, however, says she can't stay over at Shiori's because her mother needs her. Shiori remembers the kissing scene as she walks back home. Even though our protagonist's friend is about to kiss him, this happens out of jealousy. Due to jealousy over the protagonist's ability to kiss whoever he wants, this friend tries to traumatize him. Shiori comes to see them, but she's actually looking at a sign that says, "delicious," contrary to what our protagonist had assumed. Eventually, he's able to clear up the misunderstanding as he rushes to explain the circumstance. Afterward, our protagonist apologizes for the confusion and follows Shiori back home. Shiori takes the opportunity to tell him that she didn't hate him at all and thanks him for teaching her how to kiss. She starts getting closer again, but a cat interrupts their exchange, and they continue on to her house. The next day, just before the start of the summer vacation, our protagonist's geeky friend enrolls him in a summer job without his knowledge or consent. This is due to the friend's desire not to travel alone. Shiori also reveals that the employer where our protagonist has a summer job has hired him. Then, when our protagonist returns to the apartment, he discovers Shiori getting into a swimsuit, preparing for a beach trip with her friends. She admits that she also has a summer job, so they probably won't be together during that time. Watanabe asks him if he will miss her or, more precisely, forces him to say it so she can say she will miss him. Shiori seemed to be doing nothing more than earning points, but she had no idea that our protagonist would also be working there. As the summer approaches, our protagonist and other prominent characters in the series start working at the cafe restaurant where they will serve customers. Male and female guests must sleep in separate rooms. Our protagonist decides to work in the kitchen on his first day while Watanabe and her friends attend to customers. Shiori also works in the kitchen. The two are preparing a drink together as they work. Shiori demonstrates the proper technique to our protagonist. However, she accidentally spills the drink on herself after shaking it. After washing her face, our protagonist starts to slowly get closer to her as if he's about to kiss her. When he and Shiori realize they were being watched, both feel extremely embarrassed. All the guys, including our protagonist, make the decision to visit the beach after finishing their work shift. Our protagonist is tasked with going out with Watanabe. To retrieve drinks, he stands in line while waiting. Some guys aggressively approach Watanabe. Our protagonist is unsure how to handle the situation, so he quickly declares that she is his wife, which causes the guys to leave abruptly. However, our protagonist regrets saying that, but Watanabe is not upset by his apology as she liked his protective behavior. Our protagonist has a slight sunburn after spending the day at the beach. Watanabe applies sunscreen for him, and she becomes affectionate, mentioning that she misses hugs like they used to share. She implies that she wants him to treat her better during the vacation, just as they do during their marital rituals. Later, one of Watanabe's friends invites her to meet at a secluded part of the beach. When they gather, Watanabe seems angry because our protagonist keeps apologizing and worrying about what others think. She wanted him to see her as he did during their practice, but he hasn't been acting the same lately. They have a brief argument, and Watanabe is frustrated because she feels ignored. Later, another friend of Watanabe asks her to meet at a secluded beach spot. Watanabe appears upset that our protagonist is constantly apologizing and being shy. Even though he hasn't been the same lately, she wanted him to perceive her the way he did during practice. They have a short discussion, and Watanabe is upset because she doesn't feel heard. At that moment, Shiori and her friend appear, forcing Watanabe and our protagonist to hide together. However, Shiori's friend hears a noise but doesn't discover them. Despite that, our protagonist gets nervous and starts sweating, which annoys Watanabe. Shiori and her friend eventually leave out of fear. Watanabe asks our protagonist to stand up and not look at her, but he's frustrated because this contradicts what she said earlier. At that moment, she reveals herself, leading to an awkward comment. Then, our protagonist faints in front of Watanabe due to a sudden heat stroke. The following morning, Shiori is worried because she couldn't sleep all night after seeing the protagonist walking alone on the beach and Watanabe leaving the beach. The protagonist asks Shiori about her preparation for the upcoming courage test while they are both at work. She's anxious and scared, but he reassures her that he hopes they'll do the test together since it's done in pairs. Shiori praises his personality and expresses gratitude for his kindness. However, she gets embarrassed when, in a panic, she uses the word love in reference to him. Later, the protagonist's friend warns him not to misinterpret Shiori's comments, explaining that she only expressed her admiration for his personality and that he has the ability to affect the couples participating in the courage test. Once everything is set, the protagonist has to be with Shiori for the courage test to continue. Despite both wanting to be with him and the handsome guy, they manage to switch partners for the test, and Shiori remains anxious throughout. However, the protagonist supports and encourages her. But something happens. Watanabe loses her phone during the test, causing her to separate from the handsome guy to search for it. Upon learning this, our protagonist enters the forest to find it. Rain starts pouring. Despite initially thinking he found the protagonist, Watanabe is actually located by the handsome guy. The group eventually reunites after the protagonist finds Watanabe's phone. Shiori hands him an umbrella and tells him that the handsome guy found Watanabe. While they chat, the protagonist asks Shiori about how she's getting along with the handsome guy, referencing the kiss. She admits that nothing happened after that and gets nervous. He holds her hand, she turns around, and they kiss in that moment. The handsome guy confesses to Watanabe that he loves another woman and sees her only as a little sister. The handsome guy apologizes for not rejecting her earlier, but Watanabe tells him not to feel bad and admits she's happy to have fallen in love with him, even though she knows in her heart that she loves the protagonist. The summer job comes to an end, and there are a few days of vacation left. Shiori and the main character reflect on everything that has happened between them. They decide to spend some time alone, and he visits a bookstore where he discovers a book that interests him. Coincidentally, Shiori is also looking for the same book. Shiori invites the protagonist to her apartment while they're out of the bookstore and it starts raining. Once they get home, they make coffee and start reading their books. However, the protagonist is more preoccupied by Shiori's beauty than the book's content. After exchanging glances, Shiori retreats to her room, seemingly in search of another book. As the weather clears up and 2 rainbows appear in the sky, Shiori calls the protagonist. She shows him a photo of them spending time at the beach with Watanabe, and she also shares a selfie she took while admiring the rainbows before they left. The protagonist was about to say something meaningful to Shiori, but he's interrupted before he can. Days later, Watanabe, who's bored during the vacation, invites the main character on a date. He reluctantly agrees, and the 2 of them have a great time going out for drinks, visiting a cat cafe, and shopping for clothes. However, just as they're about to part ways, Watanabe realizes she forgot to buy a charm at a shrine. He chases after her as she runs away. On their way, they run into Shiori, who asks about their destination. Watanabe mentions the shrine, but Shiori suggests a race. The 2 girls race up a hill and a flight of stairs toward the shrine. Watanabe and the protagonist arrive at the shrine first and make their wishes. Finally, we see some scenes showing the ranking positions of married couples, and it's revealed that the protagonist and Watanabe are in the 3rd place.